I'm Joe Devine and welcome to Whiteboard Football Extra. In this series of short podcasts, we'll be talking to the writers of our videos, taking a more in-depth look at the topics they choose to discuss. We'll also be engaging with user comments, so if after watching a video you have follow-up questions, we have an opportunity to answer them. A stunning athlete and serial winner. Zlatan Ibrahimovic is a champion in 4 different leagues. At 35, he continues to surprise with highly impressive performances in one of Europe's toughest leagues. How has he managed to last this long, and to what degree does his self-confidence and aggressiveness inform his ability? Today, I'm joined by Nick Miller to discuss this. When people talk about Zlatan Ibrahimovic, they often talk about his character. He's very dramatic, he's overtly self-confident. He often uses humour in a way that seems a little bit more intelligent than some other footballers. And sometimes this all comes across as arrogance. He reminds me a little bit of Cristiano Ronaldo in that way. And I wondered, Nick, what you thought about the attitudes of players right at the top of the game and how maybe their characters in that sense might actually be part of the reason that they're better than other players.
Yeah, I think that's certainly one of the reasons. I don't think he sort of quite comes across as arrogant. I think he, on the pitch, certainly he is very arrogant, and he's kind of perfectly entitled to be. You mentioned Ronaldo there. He's a good example of someone. You see a lot of quite a few very top sportsmen. If they miss a chance or they make a mistake or something like that, they will sort of raise their eyes to the gods to suggest that the fates are conspiring against them, that there is no kind of possible way that chance from 10 yards that they've just missed is their fault. There's some kind of divine inspiration causing them to miss, which I think sort of allows people like this to retain some of that kind of self-assurance, because if they think, well, this can't possibly be my fault, then they will, they retain some of that self-confidence in that, well, the next time they're in that kind of situation, they won't have that kind of same prick of doubt that many sort of mortal characters or players have. So it might make someone like Ronaldo or Ibrahimovic maybe kind of sort of unpleasant to some people on a kind of character level, but I definitely think it's that helps him become a brilliant player. And it's also, the arrogance is also the kind of thing that helps him try these kind of absurd things on the pitch. Like, why else, if you were incredibly arrogant or at least incredibly confident in your own abilities, would you try those kind of weird scorpion kicks, or if you would try those kind of, particularly that goal, obviously he scored against England. It's a bicycle kick volley from 40 yards out. There are a handful of players in the world that would even try that, never mind kind of be able to pull it off.
It's interesting with football specifically, isn't it? Because I think that there's such a large number of people who want to play football, and obviously if you look at the rates of youth footballers dropping off when they're leaving academies and signing for senior teams, it's something silly like 90% of players around 14 and 15 won't make it. So it's interesting from a supporter's perspective that we can isolate Ibrahimovic within a group of people who are presumably already have a ridiculous level of determination and let alone biological talent to enable themselves to make it to where they already have as senior players. And it sort of reminds me of that line that 1 in 5 CEOs are psychopaths. I wonder if top footballers have to have the same personality type, whatever it is, conducive to succeeding at that level in football. Maybe Ibrahimovic is part of that group.
Yeah, absolutely, and you have to have that kind of. There needs to be something in your psyche to, just as even as simple as having the kind of dedication in training or anything like along those lines to succeed in football. Because I don't want to cast aspersions on your dedication to your physical well-being, but I certainly will it's as simple as something like, having the good intentions to go to the gym. You'll think, yes, I'm definitely going to go to the gym on Tuesday. I won't sort of, lie around in bed until midday, and then, it gets to midday, and there you are, you're in bed. And one of the reasons that professional footballers, and particularly professional footballers at Ibrahimovic's level, is because they have that kind of single-mindedness to train and to, have that kind of dedication to being as good as he is at the age that he is. You were talking about the ludicrous kind of drop-off rates in footballers. It's been an argument that's made before that, by definition, the best footballers in the world, you could make the argument that by definition the best footballers in the world are the best athletes in the world, because there is no other sport in which there is this amount of competition. There are so many people play football around the world, so many people watch and support football around the world, that the kind of top 1% or whatever it is that represent elite footballers are, by that definition, the best athletes in the world.
Throughout Ibrahimovic's career, he's not been short of altercations with other players. Do you think that this aggressive side of the player is part of what makes him so good, or has it potentially kept him from being an even better player?
I think it's absolutely part of what makes him so good. This could just be an argument about semantics, because one person's aggression could be someone else's competitiveness. He's been sort of accused of over-aggression quite a lot in the past. There's a quote from a few years ago from him when he was accused of being overly aggressive while he was playing for PSG, and he said, "I want a lot in the field when I play. I may look aggressive, but it's the way to feel alive, because if I relax on the field, you won't see me playing. When I'm angry on the field, I play better, according to me. And if people say I'm aggressive, it stimulates me, because I will be even more aggressive. If people say I shout, I'll shout even more, because it stimulates me." Now, admittedly, that kind of thing can sort of spill over, and as it happens, he said that shortly after he was accused of deliberately stamping on someone's head. It was Dejan Lovren's head, actually, when he was playing for Lyon. And then, obviously, recently we've had the incident with Tyrone Mings. So, obviously, that aggression can be perhaps a little excessive, it can spill over, but it's also exactly part of the reason why he's such a good player.
I've often wondered, because Ibrahimovic, is it jiu-jitsu that he does? He does a martial art, doesn't he?
Yes, something like that, yeah.
Something like that. I wondered if his aggression was more calculated than he makes out. I've read similar quotes to that, and I've heard him talking about kind of passion and aggression on the pitch. But I often see, particularly in that incident with Tyrone Mings, that to me it seems his actions seem almost emotionless, and that in some ways maybe his aggression is more calculated. I imagine if you take a martial art for a long time, I think that's something that's driven into you to sort of remain calm and kind of drain your art of emotion. So I'm not sure what you think about that.
Well, to an extent, his sort of on pitch persona is exactly that. It is a persona, and it doesn't necessarily reflect his character as a whole. But things, if you read his book, which you should sort of take with a bit of a pinch of salt, because the guy who ghosted it basically said a couple of years ago that he made up various great tracks of it because he thought it was the sort of thing that the character of Zlatan would say. But in that book, he talks about driving his car at kind of ludicrous, aggressive speeds. So I'm sure there is a sort of element of calculatedness to him, but it's real as well. I don't think you can fake is probably the wrong word, but I don't think you can necessarily conjure that up just at the drop of a hat.
On last week's podcast, I talked to Paul Ansorge about Eric Cantona, who's quite a similar character in some ways. One of the things that we talked about was how much advertising work that Cantona did, and trying to discuss the differences maybe between the man and the myth. And I think there's a similar there's an element of similarity here with Ibrahimovic as well. You mentioned the book there, and some of the stuff might be less than 100% true. How much of the real man do you think we're seeing when we see him play football, and how much of Zlatan Ibrahimovic, as we know, is this kind of almost curated marketing character?
Yeah, I do think it is to a certain extent this kind of created character, to the point where we kind of, they're not similar players, but in this respect it's slightly similar to Mario Balotelli, in as much as there are stories about Ibrahimovic and there are stories about Balotelli that people are kind of minded to believe firstly because they want to, and maybe the stories might be funny, but also because they fit with this kind of slightly kind of mythical idea of this character. So the most obvious example is the story about him turning down a trial at Arsenal by saying, I am Zlatan, I don't do auditions. People believe that because it fit in with this idea of this sort of absurdly arrogant man, but in fact that he was advised to turn that trial down by one of the coaches at, I forget whether it was Ajax or Malmo. But I think that obviously with these things there is always an element of reality to them, but it's sort of inflated into this sort of almost cartoon idea of a personality of the Zlatan persona.
In the video, you note that over half of his goals have been scored since his 30th birthday. How do you think he's managed to sustain that level of performance beyond the point where many other players have and can?
This might be quite a sort of a fairly boring answer, but I think it's probably as simple as a combination of that ludicrous dedication that we talked about earlier. There are stories about him kind of even amazing some of the staff at Manchester United when he first joined, about how often he stays after training to practice certain things. He will kind of get youth team players in to help him practice to deliver crosses for him so he can practice those volleys all the time. So the boring answer is that he despite this kind of persona of absolute arrogance, he works incredibly hard. And there's also something to be said for the fact that he has, firstly, he's sort of adapted as a player. If you watch him, he still works hard on the pitch, but he's adapted into sort of a player that is very kind of smart and efficient with his movement. He doesn't necessarily move when he doesn't need to. You can see him kind of drifting into pockets of space where he's obviously, through his experience of playing for 16, 17 years, that he instinctively kind of knows where to be now, so he doesn't waste unnecessary energy running around all over the place. And the other thing is that he has always been a player whose sort of primary skills aren't necessarily ones that decline with age. So he's never been especially quick, or at least he's never relied on his pace. So it sort of makes a certain amount of sense that what made him good at 22 will still be there when he's 35.
Okay, I'm going to refer us to some user comments now. On the last topic, there's a couple of commenters with their thoughts. Football Vino Tinto 21 says that Zlatan could have been an even better player if he didn't have such a bad attitude. No player has the right to be so arrogant and immature with other players, coaches and the press, and that it's sad to see such a talented player still behaves like an unruly 15-year-old. Jan Isafalk sees things differently. He says it's the other way around, says Jan. If he had been a nice guy, he would never have made it. It's his arrogance and bad attitude that has taken him to where he is today. If he didn't have this attitude, he'd still be playing in the Swedish league. I'm not so sure about that, but fair enough.
Yeah, I don't think that the point that the guy made about coaches there, I don't think really applies. He's certainly not been there have been a few players down the years that he's had bad relationships with, and you can see, you presumably everyone will have seen those clips of him sort of playfully, in inverted commas, kicking his teammates on the training ground. But I think if you listen to a lot of his coaches, with the kind of one notable exception of Pep Guardiola, most of them will talk with, at the very least, some affection about him, so that they might, say that he was occasionally difficult to deal with, but they will more often than not apply that to his kind of, will to win and competitiveness, rather than anything kind of destructive to the team.
Peter E says that the reason Zlatan has scored more goals since his 30th birthday is that he played in Ligue 1 for 4 seasons and racked up the goals there. Do you think that's a fair statement, Nick?
Yeah, it's certainly true that that playing in not just a league that was easier, but in a team that was so dominant for the time he was in France, that certainly has an effect. But it is worth pointing out that in his last season in Italy, he scored 35 goals in 44 games, and obviously this season in the Premier League, he's got I think the current tally is 26 in 41 games. So obviously his goals tally is perhaps a little bit inflated by playing not just in an inferior league, but in a massively superior team in that inferior league. But I think that's slightly overstated.
Paperbagman 555 says, I hope Zlatan doesn't go to MLS. What do you think about the idea of him leaving Manchester United in the summer, Nick? I know you've already said it sounds likely that he's going to hang around for a little bit longer, but can you see MLS as a sort of favoured destination if that's the case?
Possibly. I don't know. He's one of those players that genuinely does seem kind of inspired and motivated by a challenge rather than necessarily money, although obviously he is motivated by money, particularly because of the nature of his agent, Mino Raiola. I don't think he'll go this summer. I think he will want to stay at United and maybe try and win a league title, because if nothing else, he'll have that sort of the idea of a player who's won the title, who will have won the title in 5 different countries, I think now. So it's Spain, France, Italy, the Netherlands, and England. So he will. I think he will certainly stay next season. Beyond that, who knows? It depends. There's the thing about players of his age, or players as they age, is that the decline can come incredibly quickly. So while he might be scoring 25 goals this season, next season he could be he could just go off a cliff in sort of the same way that although he was slightly younger, that Robin van Persie did at United.
Nick Miller, thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much.